Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. I am so delighted to be here with Rick Levine. I can't believe he said yes to talk to me. But I'm just delighted because what I want to grill you
Uh-oh.
about, Rick, is astrological remediation. That's at our school, Moira Press, we do a lot of remediation, and you're one of the best astrologers I know as far as like transits and constantly looking at what's coming up, what's going on. And so I really what? You have my book?
Yeah, I'm into that stuff.
Oh my God. Well, I'm so glad you're here because I'm really curious. Okay, well, first of all, the first question is, let's just get right into it. I know you've had an awesome day since you are here with me. No, I'm just kidding. So here we go. Do you formally employ astrological remediation?
Define formally. I'm not being a jerk.
Well, like, okay, so I know you do a lot of transit watching and prediction and things like that. When you're predicting, let's say you see like a Mars Saturn conjunction coming up, do you literally think on remedies for that, or does it just happen naturally, or how does that work?
Okay, so the reason why I said define formally, which you didn't, but I'll answer it anyhow, is that I believe that the only reason to do astrology is what you might call remediation, and I'm not against that word, but it's not the word that I would use. I would call it ooh pronoia. It's a similar concept of how does one best take the waves that are coming and employ the tools that one might be able to put together or learn or use in order to most successfully surf that wave. And in a way, the concept of remediation it's an interesting word because I believe that culturally, the answer to your question is yes. um, but I think that part of the problem that I have with the concept of remediation can be best understood by the difference between allopathy and homeopathy.
Mm.
And in other words, our typical Western model of dealing with something that ails us is to make the ailment go away.
Mm.
And sometimes that is more symptomatic than fundamental or cause, and that in allopathic medicine, if one has a headache, one gives the person an anti-pain remedy, and if that doesn't work, one performs a headectomy. It's like remove the pain, which doesn't necessarily alter the source of the pain. Whereas a homeopathic approach, and I would guess, or I would make the argument that few astrologers consciously use homeopathic. I'm not talking remedies here. I'm talking about conceptual framework to deal with a remediation. I'll give you a quick example. A client comes to you and let's say that their natal Mars is at 28 degrees of Taurus. You immediately realize, holy smokes, they got Uranus cooking on their natal Mars. What do you tell the client?
Well, it depends on the inquiry.
Well, let's say there is no inquiry. The client just comes to you and they're coming for a consultation, and you see the person is an Aries rising and maybe is a little impulsive or energetic, and you see that Uranus is coming to conjunct their natal Mars. Most astrologers, now I didn't mean to make it into a quiz or to make anyone wrong, but most astrologers would basically in some way suggest that they need to be careful, not jump out of airplanes, not do anything stupid, and in some way be aware of this radical energy and not tempt it. Now, that is based upon suppression. That is an allopathic solution that actually um, stimulates the problem, even though it might suppress the emergency in that moment. Whereas a homeopathic approach, and again, I'm not saying homeopathic in the sense of giving someone belladonna or arnica or a remedy, but the word homeopathy is treating pathos with similar, rather than allo, opposite. And so a homeopathic approach to a client who came in without a query, but with an approaching Uranus conjuncting a natal Mars would be, how do I find a way to get this client to move their energy so that there isn't the tension buildup that then needs the release of the lightning, because lightning doesn't strike unless there's an inherent underlying tension. So that's one of the ways in which I approach remediation in general. And it's more of, how do you help a client find ways to unbottle energy where it might bottle either natally or circumstantially in a relationship, or temporally based upon transits, progressions, directions, perfections, whatever.
Maya, this is brilliant because one of the things I talk a lot to my students about is expressionism versus repressionism. And
Yeah,
and you're talking about expressionism as the correct remedy, and that's actually what I find too.
yeah,
When we repress
absolutely.
Mars, it comes out in illness, or if you repress it, it actually causes all these sideways problems. So, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm talking to you because like
Yeah,
that's
there are no bad transits. There are just transits that tend to create a situation in which we tie energy up in knots rather than allowing it to flow.
yeah.
That's why, I mean, there's nothing bad about Saturn or Mars or Pluto, but they're malefic because they're sometimes harder to flow with.
Wow, interesting. Have you ever heard of a Kriya? They're spiritual
Oh
twitching
yeah, you
energy.
mean like Hindu Kriyas?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so a
yeah,
lot of
sure.
they'll twitch out energies and like it almost like let yourself have little seizures and things like that where
Well, and and actually little seizures like that sounds like a restaurant train. Little Caesars. Um, um, this is really the basis of Wilhelm Reich's work, as people talk about the big split between Jung and Freud. There was never any split because there was never any, union. They were studying in a similar time, and but Wilhelm Reich was the designated inheritor, or he was to be the new director of the Psychoanalytic Institute, handpicked by Freud until he started lecturing. And as soon as he opened his mouth and started lecturing, Freud kicked him out of the institute
wow.
because of the concept of how a body moves energy or packages energy, that in the Reichian concept creates character by where we hold patterns physically that obviously have metaphysical components to them. And the Reichian therapy basically says, you couldn't talk your way out of it when it happened. You're not going to talk your way out of it now. Therefore, we need to basically get the client to breathe, to yell, to scream, to feel some pain, to have, catalytic, nervous twitches to react, to get that energy flowing, which is all a homeopathic remedy does. If you have a 2-year-old kid who's teething and has hot flash fevers and dilated eyes and is uncomfortable and is delirious, you give them a homeopathic remedy of belladonna, which in normal doses is a heart stopper, but in homeopathic doses basically creates rapid heartbeat, high fever, dilated, all the same symptoms. And you give that to a kid, and they kind of have even worse symptoms for 2 or 3 minutes, and then they're gone. That's the way homeopathy works, and that's the way I think astrologers would be wise. And it sounds like, without that academic framework, that's the way you're doing it. And it's all, all traditions have some aspect of that kind of catharsis or the moving energy, whether it's listening to music, whether it's dancing, whether it's chanting, whatever the motions are that we might employ. It's about engaging and dancing with your demons rather than drugging them into submission.
Wow, that's amazing. Just for people listening, pronoia is a Greek word meaning like knowledge beforehand or wisdom beforehand. So you're saying that you kind of you like remediation is like a newfangled term for something you guys have been doing, the Pleos have been doing forever or whatever. Is like which is looking into the future to create a brighter future, basically, or and of course, in India, remedy has been going on for thousands of years. It's like it just got kind of lost on the West. It's like maybe even repopularized now, but it's always been part of astrology. Is
It
really
has,
cool.
but Indian remediation is different on a lot of levels, even though an Ayurvedic practitioner who also uses Jyotish might understand some of these concepts. A lot of Jyotish or Hindu or Vedic astrology practitioners come from this fear place and work with suppression and repression. And let me be clear, suppression and repression are very different, but the result is identical.
Hmm.
The difference is that if you know you're doing it, you're not repressing it. People go, "Oh yeah, I repress that all the time." Bullshit. What you repress all the time is the fact that you always, pick your nose and, oh no, I never do that. Oh yeah, you do. No, I don't. No, everyone knows you do. You don't. That's repression. As soon as you know about it and you try to stop doing it, that's suppression. And suppression is often what happens. I mean, sexual pleasure and activity is often a result of suppression. This is basically Wilhelm Reich. His first book was The Psychology of Mass Fascism. See, he had this problem when he was studying Freud. He was also reading Karl Marx. And he realized that the working class was not suppressed economically, it was suppressed sexually. And that once the church and the government gang up on people and shut them down, they're ready psychologically to acquiesce to an external power. Very brilliant thing, very amazing concept. But the point is that regardless of whether we know we're doing it or not, when we shut something down, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously, that moment of denial makes a node. And remember, the word node is just Latin for knot. It ties energy up into a knot. And that becomes the problem because those knots create their own circulation of energy around this mass that isn't even there. There's nothing there. It's like the node of the moon. It's just an intersection of 2 points. And so the question becomes, how do we find these nodes, not just the lunar or planetary nodes, but how do we look at a chart and find these nodes? And then what can we do to encourage the client or to bring some catalyst into a session that begins the dissolution of those knots or of a knot in particular?
Wow, this is amazing. Yeah, because illness starts in the energy body. When you get one of those knots, it can cause physical illness. And all these things. Was Wilhelm Reich the one who did the tension release cycle of Orgon?
Yeah, orgone therapy. Yeah,
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 that's
we actually
Wilhelm
have a
Reich.
video on that at school about the tension release cycle. And yeah, it sounds like, I mean, you sound like a brilliant remedy artist, although you don't call it that.
No, it's true, but I know what it is. I mean, not I know what it is, but that's why I asked when you say the word remediation, what I was looking for, if I answered yes, am I saying yes to something that has nuances based upon a definition that is not my definition? Because because to me, remediation in some way um, has, it's almost like, okay, one of my pet peeves about modern astrology, and it's something that whenever I get a chance to bring it up or talk about it, it's a pet topic, and that is astrology as we practice it. Even though we've come a long way in the past 60, 70 years, astrology is basically a patriarchal system built by guys for guys, period.
Hmm.
And when we talk about remediation, we're talking about a patriarchal something that I'm doing to a client or a patient that in some way is an authority, a top down. And I know it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be that way, but I think in part of the problem that I see with a lot of Vedic practitioners is the remediation doesn't touch the fundamental issue, just, wear the sapphire or just say this mantra or just practice this mudra. And I'm not minimizing those things, but those things are part of catalysts. They don't necessarily touch the underlying initial cause of what our problem or knots that we tie ourselves into actually are.
Interesting. You know, to speak to the patriarchal issue, it's like I actually wrote remediation in response to having translated the Vedas Valens anthology and all the Hellenistic astrology being so faded. I couldn't alter the translations, but what I could do at the end of it is write a response paper, which was okay, and there is a remedy for
No,
anything.
and that's what I love about that
You know,
book. That's what I love about this work is because it is a response to that. I
yeah,
mean, I ultimately believe that the most important concept that any astrologer can learn is from quantum physics, and that is to understand the particle wave duality. And why that's important is that as long as we're talking about the three-dimensional Aristotelian world of cause and effect and material, things that we can perceive with our five senses, there is basically that cause and effect. But once we go into the microcosm and we realize that things are no things, that things are an apparency based upon the intersection of high frequency waves, and that everything propagates like a wave, but as soon as we look at it and measure it, somehow it becomes a particle. The particle wave duality. Light is neither a particle or a wave, it's both, and it just depends upon whether we're measuring it or not. Now, that sounds crazy, but is the moon a particle or a wave? And you see, if we truly believe in the work of Thoth or Hermes Trismegistus or whoever it may have been, if we truly believe that as above, so below, the inside and the outside are not reflections of one another, they're the same fucking thing.
yeah.
That's what the Emerald Tablet really says, is there's no causal relationship. There is one,
Mm.
and that the microcosm and the macrocosm are the same. Now, if that's the case, then the particle wave duality at the microcosmic level exists at the macrocosmic level. We can see Saturn up there at 15 degrees of Pisces or wherever it is, and we can see its rings. But when we're not looking at it, it's propagating as a 3 cycle a century waveform.
Mm.
And so here's the thing. Fate is to particle as free will is to wave. Done.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're making me think about how astrology is actually ancient manifestation theory, and so much of manifestation is basically turning your light waves into a particle. You know, like you might have a wave that says, okay, I'm going to, I don't know, uh, I'm going to use this Saturn I don't know, anything we want, we can actually send a wave out and then make a particle of it. I mean, I don't know why that
It's
can't.
absolutely true, but I would take that one step further, or the problem with that kind of thinking, and again, it's not incorrect thinking, is that once you truly understand the nature of quantum physics, things don't have to pop into the three-dimensional world to have a life of their own, to be conscious, and to exist. And so from that standpoint, one of the mistakes that I think we make as astrologers, or as, Deepak Chopra once quipped, and I hate him for this because it's such a damn good quote. And what he said was, modern science suffers from its belief in the medieval superstition of materialism.
Interesting.
No, it's a good one. But the thing is that things don't have to pop into the material world in order for them to be real.
Interesting.
That consciousness does fine without a body.
Hmm. Okay, well, so let's actually, we're talking symbolically now and kind of like hyper abstract. So let's go really concrete for a second, and let's talk about the Mars in Cancer trine Saturn and Pisces, right? Like that's happening now. Okay, so let's say we were going to avoid a node, like as Mars trines Saturn. I know it's a trine, but you know it is two malefics coming together. How would we? So how would you, with pronoia, avoid help people avoid making a node of energy with that Mars Saturn?
Well, I actually would encourage people to make a conscious node of those two planets because they can be such an effective remediation to the other problems that we have going on right now, with Saturn and Pluto. Jupiter square. I mean, we sometimes forget when an aspect is not exact or applying that we are in the midst of a Jupiter Saturn square to a great mutation conjunction. I mean, and that's basically from August all the way up through, I think, next June. And so that's one of the things that's cooking. Saturn has this pressure on it from this expansive, everything's going to be okay, just grow. And Saturn is trying to find a place to find stability in a sign where there is no stability. But at the same time, we also have Saturn making a half square with Pluto. And anyone who's worked with semi-squares and sesqui-squares know that they're not less powerful than squares or oppositions. They're just more pointed. In fact, they may be even more powerful. And this three times of the Saturn making a semi-square, that's a half square to Pluto, it's the first hard aspect to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January 20th, or in January 2020, that was within 10 hours of the announcing and the first announced mortality of the Wuhan, virus, that there's something right now. And of course, when Saturn and Pluto, the conjunction, square, opposition, square, conjunction, square, opposition, that cycle, or the conjunction, semi-square, square, sesqui-square, opposite, that cycle is a cycle of how physical reality boundaries, Saturn, have to mutate and transform when they actually bump up against each other in a engaging kind of a way, whether it's the bombing of the World Trade Tower at a Saturn-Pluto opposition, or World War I at a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, or the founding of Israel at a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and so on. And so we're right in the middle of this very complicated period of time with the Jupiter square Saturn, while Saturn is semi-squaring Pluto. And the first of the three exact semi-squares was on May 6th of this year.
That's that's almost enough math for me.
Okay, well, the May 6th of this year was basically within 48 hours of that, there were 28 separate towns in Lebanon that Israel bombed. There were 14 other attacks that were, major IDF attacks into Lebanon. And that was, all around that first Saturn-Pluto semi-square. And the second Saturn-Pluto semi-square is on September 25th. But this eclipse had that semi-square all over it. And on the day of the eclipse, we had another round of crazy attacks in Lebanon. I mean, this time, okay, so there were only a dozen people killed, but there have been over 3,000 people injured from cell phones or pagers exploding. There's something here that's really potent. So coming back to your question, how would I use that Mars trine, the Mars trine Saturn, is what is it that I want to make real? How can I reorganize what I know and put some action, some energy, some physicality towards something that has substance, that will leave a node, that will leave a trace after the aspect dissipates, that in some way can help remediate the real thing that needs remediation, and that's Saturn not being trined by Mars, but being squared by Jupiter and semi-squared by Pluto. That's what needs remediation, because
Wow.
those are a lot more complicated.
Well, that was not what I thought I was going to hear, and I'm going to think about that. No, I think that's actually a great point. That every aspect is good for something, right? Like Mars and Saturn are good for some things, and I like what you're saying. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit because I'm really curious about this. What do you do if you see a hard aspect of the natal chart? Like, what is your approach to, you know? Like, I know that you're a very healing astrologer. Otherwise, I mean, you have a Cancer moon. I mean, like, otherwise people wouldn't love you so darn much. Like, what do you do if you see like a Mars, Pluto, Uranus, Moon, Saturn conjunction in the 12th house in Aries?
All right, let me ask you this. What do you do if you see a Cancer moon that's partile square an Aries sun and square Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Neptune and semi-square Saturn?
Well, you ask him to make a video, is what you do.
That's the point. Is that I don't look at a chart with a lot of squares and see it as afflicted or as negative. I see it as, okay, what's the opportunity here? How do we move this energy? What can catalyze this into something where there's movement? Look, squares are the least stable angle. The 90-degree angle is the least stable angle in the construction of the universe. Forget about astrology. If you take four toothpicks and put them together in a square, you can take any two sides of it, and I can wiggle them out of shape. You can't hold the square. It needs a triangulation. Yeah, a triangularization, I guess that word would be. But the problem with trines is that they are, because they're triangulated, the energy flows try to break that energy. I mean, people, I've seen way worse charts with strong trines and grand trines of people who just can't get any traction, can't make changes. Their life is a mess. Their job is a mess. They go through a divorce. They move across the world. They go back to school. They change careers, and 4 years later, their life is exactly the same as it was, when they were in that. It's like, so squares, I think, are, they're feared because when we lived in a world where we didn't have enough food to, survive for the day or the week, and when we were completely concerned with the 90-degree angle. The 90-degree angle is the angle of the material world. And the reason why squares are so reliable when it comes to predicting events in the three-dimensional world is that everything that is three-dimensional, including my desk, is basically an illusion that's created by high frequency waves intersecting at 90-degree angles. That's what creates the illusion of reality. And if I live in a world where I'm struggling to have a roof over my head and to have water and to have food, and I got 90-degree angles in my chart, it's going to make all of that even more overwhelming. But if I live in a world where I have some of those things together, those 90-degree angles are the things that are going to actually encourage me to ask questions, to look for resolutions to other people that might not even see them as problems, yet they're suffering. And so I don't see anything wrong with I don't look at a chart. I don't see a bad chart. I just don't. I see people who have trouble with certain charts, but that's why we have spiritual practice. That's why we have meditation. That's why we have therapy. That's why we have the antidepressant. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I mean, I think antidepressants or antipsychotics or whatever are an okay remedy too. I mean, if you have a hallucinating aspect in your chart, like that's fine to go on a med that helps with that.
Absolutely. I mean, Ram Dass used to quip that, that God comes to the homeless in the form of food and shelter. That
Uh,
if you have a 500-pound weight on your foot, your sense of enlightenment is getting that fucking weight off your foot.
Yeah. Well, I think you did one remedy there, which was reframing something that's seen as hard into something as beautiful. And I think that is a huge remedy that we can do is reframe things for people, whatever it is. And then, yeah, I agree with you. Like tries can be hard. But then you're also building on if the chart was hard or was expressing in ways we didn't like, then there's all these ways that you would approach it with spiritual practice and like all these things. So you do sometimes employ what we would call remedies to hard, like if in growth theory.
Altering someone's diet, encourage. See, this is the beauty of Ayurveda. Go out and watch a sunset every night. That's a remediation for depression. Now, I'm
Wow.
not saying it's the only one, but in true Ayurveda, in Ayurvedic medicine, the colors of your room, the food that you eat, the colors of the food that you eat. It's not just the gem that you wear or the mantra that you say. Everything is remedy.
Oh my God, that's beautiful. Yeah, color's a big one. If someone's too, if you know how like areas will be like, I saw red and then I punched a guy. It's like we don't want to put them in a red room. We want to put them in a green room. If they're trying to calm out areas down, you'd put them where they're.
I have a book that is unwritten, but if I ever was so moved, I could write it in probably 2 or 3 weeks. It's a workshop that I've given. The title of it is "The Planets in Your Pocket."
Mm.
And basically it says, I don't care what your sign is, I don't care what the aspects are during the day. In every moment, there's situations where we say, you know what? I'm feeling a bit heavy. I could use a bit of Jupiter right now. Or holy shit, I'm so pissed off at my ex. I I need to get that Mars back tucked into my pocket. Or I need to reach into my pocket and pull out some Pluto so I can go deep, so I can get to the core of something. But we always have these energies around us, regardless of what our charts are. And it's a form of remediation to develop practices that enable us to fine tune these planetary archetypal energies as if they were radio stations.
That's brilliant. If you needed a little bravery, you could listen to a metal song, which is kind of martial, right? Or if you need to calm down, you could listen to a Venusian song, whatever we could. But that's brilliant.
I I actually have music lists that when I'm doing my long form retreats, like in Mexico or Indonesia or in India, where we have 2 weeks to really settle in. I mean, I have playlists that are Venus or Uranus or Mars that we listen to 3 or 4 songs, and then we discuss how those songs made us feel.
Wow. Yeah. Well, good astrologers are frequency artists. We're dealing with freaks, like
That's all we are.
yeah, well, yeah, and so it's really comes to, like music is one of the biggest frequency producers ever. But there's many you can use a tuning fork or a Tibetan bowl or like there's cutting vibes is a big job. Like we deal with bad vibes, and that's yeah. I'm gonna change scope a little bit
Go
because
for it.
you're
Yeah,
giving
we're on
good
time.
answers. Okay, so why do you talking about Mars a little bit? Why do you think conflict exists in nature? Like, astrologers kind of accept that conflict will never go away. People keep trying to fight peace on Earth and all this stuff, and the astrologers are like, well, the planet of war exists. Like, so why do you think we have Mars? Like, what is the purpose of that?
Um, Mars and Saturn to create boundary. Without boundary, there is no life.
Mm,
Even in every cell of our body, a cell in a body is formed because Mars polarizes molecules that come together, proteins, and some proteins are hydrophilic and some are hydrophobic. And what happens is that these proteins, as they come together, the hydrophobic proteins get buried in between the hydrophilic, which means that the ones that love water actually create a wall around a cell so that it creates a boundary of outside and inside. And so Mars is that polarity, because Mars is, metal, iron. It's polarized. Even at a subatomic realm, at an atomic realm, there's, basically a positive and negative, or a yin and yang, and that's what Mars is all about. Once you create a north-south pole, a polarity, those polarities have attraction and repulsion, and that's required to create any structure in the universe.
Wow.
And so Mars is necessary, and when two boundaries basically bump up against each other, they're either going to melt and merge into one another, or they're going to create a wall between them. And if they create a wall between them, then there may be things on the inside of one boundary versus on the inside of the other, whether it's natural resources in a country, or whether it's we bumped into a fish that looks like it would be good to eat. All of these are basically about boundary meeting. And then, when we eat something and we assimilate it, ultimately it becomes the function of Virgo, which is the ultimate binary function of the universe. Virgo, we say it's the critic, or, and now Virgo's basic job is yes or no. And in the colon, that's what happens, is that the body goes, yes, I'm going to assimilate this, let it through the colon into the bloodstream. No, that's shit. Send it down the road, let Pluto get rid of it. But the point is that we need Mars. We need all of these energies. And if we didn't have the planets to label them, we'd figure out some other way to create these archetypes. But we're always going to have things bumping into each other. The question is, how do we resolve it? And so when you come to concepts of the intellect of, maybe there's a way we can resolve this fact that we both want this water from this river, and there's not enough for everyone, but maybe we can figure out some way to make it work for both of us. That's where, Venus or Libra or other things come into the equation, but we're always going to have the issue of bumping up against other people's boundaries.
Beautiful. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, people are always like, "Why, God, why?"
Well, and it's like it's like when I hear, "Oh, Saturn," for years I was not my Saturn is a tough one, and for years I used to say, I got to find Dr. Zodiac because I want to get some cosmetic chart surgery and have a Saturnectomy. But the thing about Saturn is that without Saturn, we would have no hydroelectric power, because Saturn builds walls that contain energy, and that whether it's a hydroelectric dam or whether it's a computer or a radio, we need capacitors, and a capacitor is like a rain barrel. It's like it rains and now it's dry and I'm thirsty. Well, if I create a Saturnian wall to keep that energy of that liquid in there, then I've basically I've used Saturn in a positive way, rather than if I was a race car driver and just ran into that same wall. What the fish say when it swam into the wall? Damn.
Oh my God. Okay. Okay, so then do you predict gory futures? Like why or why not? Like if you see
I think
something really coming,
yeah. Look, I had a client send me an email last week, a few weeks ago, saying, I've just been notified that I have this surgery that I've been waiting to have, and it's on Friday. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. And I noticed that there was a Moon Pluto conjunction and I'm really freaking out because what can I do? And I responded to the person saying, I'm not looking at your chart. I'm not doing a consultation, but I will tell you that your worry about the Mars Pluto conjunction on the day of this procedure will probably cause more damage than the Mars Pluto conjunction.
Mm. Interesting. Well, okay, so I'm going to extrapolate from your answer that putting worry into the minds of man is worse than what the transit would bring, according to you, and that might not be healthy.
Yes, but there's a difference between worry and what Paul Tillich, the theologian, called ultimate concern. In other words, there are things that we would be happy to slip into denial over and repress or suppress the fact that if I keep driving at 80 miles an hour in this direction, I'm going to go off the cliff. So there are, I think it was Grant Louis who said that prophecy was just simply knowing a trajectory and continuing it, you know?
Mhm.
Um, the problem, though, is that we often take textbook responses to a particular archetypal connection, like Pluto transiting someone's natal moon or whatever, make up whatever, bad transit you want to, make up. But there's nothing bad about that that transit. In fact, I would suggest that if we were now let me put it this way. If caterpillars had egos the way we do, there wouldn't be any butterflies because no caterpillar in its right mind would ever fucking get into a chrysalis because the caterpillar is done. And that I think of William Blake, who wanted as his epitaph, William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. We look at things and our fear becomes the problem. There's a line from one of the many poems that I've written, and the line is, the fear of the fall is the fate that we seal.
Mm. Interesting.
The ledge is unreal.
Mm. Okay. Well, I mean, I, I
Look,
don't
and I'm
know.
not saying that Saturn doesn't exist. I'm not. This is not me being an anti-realist. I mean, I get that there is the Greek hemarmene. There is fate that we're not going to change. If I drop my cell phone, from a two-story building onto concrete, or my best friend, they're going to break. Either of them. you know and so I'm not saying that there aren't real things, but what happens is that often the worst case scenarios occur when we take the course of least resistance, which is actually the true meaning and the true concept behind yoga. Is not putting ourselves in funny positions. Yoga comes from a Sanskrit word that means the yoke of an oxen. And it's, how do you take the random energy of this incredible power and in some way harness it so that it's accomplishing something rather than just running amok? And so the real question, and of course, there's all types of yoga. There's jhana yoga, which is the yoga of thinking. There's karma yoga, the yoga of doing. And yet people think, oh, yoga is just sitting in these postures. And even the word asana really actually comes from the same root word of attitude. And attitude is not what we think it is because it's an old nautical term. And the attitude of a sail is how far it's leaning into the wind. And if you don't lean into the wind, you don't get any traction. If you lean too far into the wind, the boat goes over.
Ah.
So the real question is that when we're having a transit coming up, the time to figure out how to work with it is not while you're in the middle of the storm. it's practicing and understanding the nature of the energy so that when you're in the middle of the storm and you're in crisis and you've just been diagnosed with terminal cancer and your best friend's just died and your daughter's lost her job, whatever, that you remember, oh my God, this is where I am and I know this spot and I know what to do.
Mm, interesting. Makes me think of, I think it was Ptolemy who said like the reason to look into the future is to practice as if so that when it comes like you're ready for it in
That
that
is
way.
true, but if we practice for the worst case scenarios, that's what will come.
Okay, okay. All right, well, we actually got through all my questions. I want to know with our last 2 minutes here, what's up with you? Like, how can people find you? Do you want people to come after you? Like, where can we find you?
Come after me, baby. Yeah, I'm on Patreon and I have an apprentice program that I've been running now for about 6 years. I typically have about 30, 35 people in that program. If someone wants to work with me on a regular basis, they can do that. I do accept clients, but my waiting list is embarrassing, and so it's not the easiest way to work with me. I do also through Patreon, I do an online monthly chart interpretation class, and I'm teaching a lot these days. And if you and on YouTube, I mean, that's probably the easiest way to find me is on YouTube, Rick Levine, or I think it's youtube.com/at Rick Levine or Rick Levine Astrologer. Any of those will find me. But I do a monthly forecast on the first of every month, that typically gets 50 to 90,000 views, unique views a month.
Well,
And so there's a lot of people who kind of keep in touch with me that way. The reason why I pulled an all-nighter last night was because I do a mid-month update for my $3 a month patrons, and I have about 1,000 of them. And so they get a mid-month update that the rest of the world never sees. And so there's a lot of things that I do, either video or online like that. Not writing dailies anymore. And although, like I say, I am seeing some clients, I'm mostly doing teaching and online stuff, video stuff, and writing. In fact, that end of my office is set up for last night when I recorded my. I sit at my desk when I do things like this, but I have like a recording area set up there with lighting and so on for my production stuff, which is really what I'm doing a lot of. I'm coming up to, I just got back from a couple of weeks in England where I did some teaching and did the AA, the Astrological Association conference there. I'll be speaking at the OPA conference in Park City, Utah, in mid-October. And then let me just think, on November 24th through December 4th, I'm doing a 2-week retreat in the south end of Goa, India, and it's a place where I've taught out. It's taught out several times before. It's a gorgeous Ayurvedic healing spa, just a 3-minute walk to an amazingly beautiful beach. It's a 2-week immersion of initiation into astrology, beginners to, usually my group is about 1/3 practicing professionals, a third, students, and a third kind of people who know their signs and the planet names and some basic stuff. It's my favorite audience. People go, I would never teach to an audience like that, but I love it because it's full immersion. Everyone gets something out of it, and people, there's still some room there. It'll probably fill up. It usually does. We limit to 30 people. But Heaven and Earth workshops, and those are the same people. Evelyn Roberts, who puts on Liz Green's workshops and has done workshops with Rob Hand and Rick Tarnas. And I mean, and this is my 13th or 14th Heaven and Earth workshop. It's heavenandearthworkshops.com, and there's a complete daily activity curriculum, day by day thing, and there's still some openings. So that's some ways in which people can follow up with me.
Well, I have to say, I feel so grateful and blessed that you talked to me, even though you're so busy. I was really curious as to your answers on these questions, and I respect you so much. If and one last thing, send me your address so I can send you a little gift.
Oh, I will do that. And would you sign my book for me right now? If I just hold it up here, could you
Here,
just
I'll
like,
sign it. All right.
um, and no, and it's my pleasure. I appreciate the work that you do, and yeah, enough said there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rick, and I will.
And I'd be happy to have another conversation with you anytime. What, it's like I'm the kind of busy that I have Gemini rising, and I've spent my life practicing looking busier than I am. I'm busy, but if I want to do something, I'll make time for it.
That is so sweet. I'm the similar kind of busy, and I wanted to see you really bad. I really miss you.
Yay.
All right, Rick. I will talk to you again. If you come up with anything you want to talk about, you just let us know too. We've got a whole school over here. So, all right. Have a good night.
Cool.
Bye.